morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're watching from around the world. Welcome to today's webinar. This is a very special webinar, learnings from the world's biggest breaches, thriving in today's cybersecurity reality, and having a very special topic. We're joined by a very special guest speaker. Special guest speaker, Forrester Principal Analyst, Sandy Carielli. Hey, Sandy, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Great to be here.
We're happy to have you here. So in addition to Sandy, we have the excellent team here at Broadcom. We have Sadia Copeland, Chris Cropper, and today's moderator, host, friend to the program, cube neighbor, Rita Minacci. So, hey, Rita. Now, before we hand this off to Rita, do have a few housekeeping items. We'd love to encourage any and all questions. So if you have any questions for us, ask them below. We'll do our best to answer all of your questions live. We have the team here for the entire hour. So any questions you have, I'm sure we'll be able to address most of them here today. Now, without further ado, let's hand this off to today's host, Rita.
Hi, thanks so much, AJ. Well, I'm really excited for this. It's going to be a good one. I've worked with Sandy for many years, so we've done this a bunch of times. And Chris and Sadia, I've been working with a lot recently because of the work they do, and they'll tell you a little bit more about that when they do quick intros of themselves, and then I'll go through the agenda. So y'all want to quickly just tell us about a little bit how your perspective on security, why you're here, right? Why you're the experts on this panel. We'll start with Chris.
All right. Hey, thanks, Rita. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to talk about this. I am a modern compliance architect with Broadcom, VMware Tanzu team. My interest in this is to try to simplify the process of compliance for anyone in the DoD, public sector, and lots of high-risk industries such as finance. There is a requirement that software and infrastructures be demonstrated as, we'll say, compliant. And what that really means is that their security can be validated. So my role is to take those sometimes thousands of questions and turn it into something that is easily understood and teachable, and something that empowers our customers towards solutions.
All right. Sandy, you're next. You can all see the same thing, so we'll just go down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Sandy Carielli. I'm a principal analyst at Forrester Research. My coverage area is application security. And a lot of what I've been doing over the last few years has really been looking at the trends in application security, challenges with certain emerging technologies and emerging development methodologies. And for this webinar, I'm drawing on a lot of my research into some of the attack trends and lessons that we've learned from breaches and how we have to apply that to application security today.
All right, over to me. I am Sadia Copeland. I am the Army Software Factory Portfolio Product Manager. So I product manage a portfolio of security teams with a focus on bringing DevSecOps principles and practices to the way that we approach security at the Army Software Factory. That is making sure that our development teams know what they need to know for the security pieces, that our platform teams are enabled to make the changes that they need to make and are able to observe the metrics that they should be observing, and then allowing our security team to really thread through all of that to bring those DevSecOps principles together.
Yeah. So pretty awesome stuff. I'm, honored to have you all here. So we'll just go quickly through the agenda. As Sandy mentioned, she lives research, right? And talks to end users and vendors, looking at security and application security. So she's going to give us a little bit of a highlight of the past year's biggest breaches and what we've learned from them. And again, this is going to be a conversation. So folks, please do ask questions. And of course, Chris and Sadia, feel free to interject when necessary or appropriate. And then we're going to take these things and we're going to talk about, take these things and turn them into practical ways for you, or practical outcomes or practical practices, if you will, which is sort of redundant to say, but as you're looking at your security strategy, look at how you can improve your breaches. We're going to talk about how you can integrate things like continuous security, and then how they've done it at the software factory, where Sadia can talk about that. And of course, what we believe is the case for having a platform and how that helps simplify and really make your security strategy just scale and consistent and yeah, again, help you deal with these things because breaches are going to happen. But before we get in there, I really wanted to put Chris a little bit on the hot seat. Sorry, Chris, you were at a security event earlier this year and you were talking to the CISO. You were there, did a session with the CISO of the Army Software Factory. Can you tell us the TLDR of your session and what you learned from that event and questions that came up?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for just encouraging sharing that, because it was a really exciting event. So I was able to be a speaker at the ISC2 Security Congress. For those who aren't familiar, perhaps the certification, CISSP, CCSP, a lot of the certifications are required by DoD and other high-risk industries rely on IC2 as sort of the validation of skills. And so what I talked on was inheritable controls and their role in a successful in an organization that's successfully integrated compliance and security. And it was a fantastic discussion. I lost count of the number of questions, probably at least 10 questions. And so lots of engagement in the discussion. And a lot of what we wanted to focus on was just the reality that inheritable controls are often misunderstood, because for many organizations, they see an inheritable control. And I should probably clarify also for this discussion what inheritable control is. When we're talking about security risk, there is risk that you are directly responsible for as the implementer of a software solution or a infrastructure. And then there's things like for a cloud provider, there are things that the cloud provides that are security capabilities that you are not responsible for then as the system owner. I'm trying not to use too much DoD speak, so please feel free to ask clarifying questions. That's why if I seem like I'm thinking through this carefully, I am. But the bottom line is there are capabilities that you get, there are benefits that you get from working in something like a cloud environment, but a lot of times those are still misunderstood. It's not as simple as just, hey, we're in AWS or Azure, we don't have to think about a security risk anymore. There's still work that has to be done to implement that securely, which I'm sure we'll touch on some of that in this next hour. And so our discussion centered around honing in on that a little bit and helping teams understand both their responsibility in inheritable controls, but also refocus back on the good part, right? That there is benefit to that. It just needs to be misunderstood, and it needs to be something that empowers your organization to be successful. So, and then I actually got to listen to a few other discussions. I'll say very briefly, it was exciting it's always exciting to hear other folks in the industry talk about some of the challenges they're facing. I saw a lot of challenges around the misconception of OSS and open source software and third-party dependencies and understanding those risks. I heard a great talk by a speaker from Booz Allen Hamilton that ironically, I think he left the conclusion open-ended, but it was, which is more risky, OSS or commercial off-the-shelf software? And it surprisingly didn't actually reach a conclusion. So maybe I'll share more about that if it comes up in this session, but there is a lot of, maybe ambiguity is the word, but at least a lot of risk that is still misunderstood that relies on resources like what we have here from Sandy.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. All right, so let's get to it. So Sandy, we're going to start. She's going to give us a quick overview of some of the things that she's been looking at and watching over the past year.
Awesome. And Chris, you set me up beautifully, because some of what I'm going to be talking about is really related to challenges in the software supply chain, which I'm going to get to shortly. So what you're seeing here on screen, every year we do research. We look at the top 35 global breaches of the previous year based on the number of records exposed. In this case, the top 35 breaches exposed 1.5 billion records. And looking at 2024 so far, I think we're going to surpass that, but we'll get to that. What you see here is that last year, public sector really got hammered. 43% of the breaches were public sector, education, and healthcare. And what I will say about that is that if you actually look at the types of breaches, the causes of the breaches, software supply chain came up quite a bit. In fact, 3 of the top 35 breaches, 3 of the breaches that we looked at in our top 35 were due to specifically the MOVEit vulnerability. So that tells you something about just how prevalent that vulnerability was and just how much damage that caused, that was responsible for 3 of the top 35. And Rita, I have to tell you, a bunch of breaches that didn't quite make top 35 that were in like the 40s or 50s, those were also MOVEit related. So we really saw, this software supply chain issue have huge repercussions across the industry. That was one of the things that really, really stood out to me. And if we move on to the next slide, we can talk a little bit more about some of the trends we saw beyond industry. As I said here, MoveIt was the culprit in 3 of these, and I think at least 2 of them were government based. I'd have to go back and look, possibly even the third. But if you think about the number of small agencies and applications that were using it, it ended up playing a huge role in a lot of major data breaches that were exposing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of customer records. I don't know about the rest of you, but I just kind of wait for the next notification that my data's been breached to see who I can take advantage of for credit monitoring for the next few years. There's always someone, right? But we found some kind of interesting trends and lessons learned in all of this if we keep looking at this. Which was, first of all, applications are absolutely still the most common way in. We ask this question every year, and this isn't based on the top 35. This is actually based on survey data. Every year we ask security decision makers, were you breached? Was it due to an external attack? If it was due to an external attack, how did the attacker get in? And across the board, over half the time, it was something application related, whether it was software supply chain, software vulnerability, or web application exploit. You can see 27% said that their breach was due to a software supply chain breach. Same amount said due to software vulnerability, slightly fewer due to web application exploits. If you go back over the last few years of looking at this data, and I think you've seen previous iterations of this, Rita, applications have consistently been in the top. So this is an ongoing challenge, an ongoing problem that we're having.
Hey, quick question. What about APIs in this picture? Did you put those? Yeah.
So we don't talk about APIs as a separate category here. My suspicion is that if you look at web application exploit, that includes a lot of API security issues. And by the way, software supply chain too. So much of software supply chain, particularly when you think of all of the APIs that are now calling, say, LLMs that aren't well secured, and some of the elements of that broader software supply chain and what that means for the attack surface, that's an API security problem too. I will tell you, APIs are still one of my top end user inquiries. It's still an area of struggle for a lot of people. No one has a great handle on their entire API exposure, how many APIs they have in their environment. And we just published an API security landscape earlier this year. And what we found is it's still kind of a patchwork. And so we're still putting all these pieces together to protect them. And it's a struggle. And there are still some significant API security related breaches. It's still an issue.
Yep. So I can't help but wonder the role of SBOMs in helping with addressing some of these issues, or helping mitigate the risk, or even like recover from a breach. Is that, maybe we'll talk about it later, but just wanted to throw it out there because I can't, when you're talking about this, I'm like, oh, SBOMs seem to be a good option to help ease some of this, some of the damage.
It's interesting. I've been a big fan of SBOMs for the past several years. I think even before it started being included in a lot of government requirements, it was something that I was looking at and talking about. And I've been pretty happy to see the uptake of them and the requirement for them. I think that in theory, they're a useful artifact, because if there is a major vulnerability in a software package, having a good sense of where in your environment that software package is deployed and exposed, that's great. I think there's still a bit of a disconnect between having them available and being able to effectively make use of them and knowing what to do with them. So it's definitely, we're getting there. It's better than it was, but it's not automated yet. There's not always consistency. My colleague Janet Worthington has been covering software supply chain, software composition analysis, SBOMs, and there's still some work to be done there. So we're moving in the right direction, but we're certainly not at the finish line.
Yeah, I think they're often misunderstood. And one of the things that, because when we talk about it often, or at least I used to, it's like SBOMs, it's like, okay, but you have to consider that there are two kind of audiences here. There's the
Yeah.
producers and the consumers, and
Yeah.
understanding that there's two different constituents involved here is one of the first steps. So I agree. I think they're still a little misunderstood. So
It's not a
we're
panacea.
hoping.
You know,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is one element of
exactly.
addressing an issue and helping to prioritize and recover effectively. But you don't just sort of sprinkle S-bombs into your environment like fairy dust and everything's okay.
Yeah, we had a great story here with, David Zenzian quite
Yeah.
well. You've done a bunch of webinars with him and with me. We were able to, the recent cups vulnerability from a few
Right.
weeks ago, just within minutes, we were able to see if it was impacted any of our product, right? Our Tanzu platform. So it was just a really great demonstration of how easily you can use SBOMs to figure out, okay, do we have any of this software in our systems, and where is it? So luckily we didn't. We're good, but yeah, it was just like, oh yeah, just run the scan, run the SBOM scan and the SBOM analysis, right? So that's something I think that's important.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Sadia or Chris have anything to say here about, there's lots of federal agencies from the FDA to DHS that are requiring SBOMs for any software that they're using. Are you seeing that happening and understanding in those agencies? At least your work at the software factory?
So I can talk a little bit about how we use SBOMs at the software factory. So we have had SBOM analysis in our CI/CD pipelines for the entirety of our application development at the software factory. It's a relatively easy addition to automate the generation of using static code analysis tools to generate the SBOMs. To Sandy's point, though, just having it's not that magic fairy dust. You need to actually now do something with it. So you have the artifact. That's a great, starting point. In addition to the artifact, we also have automation in place that compares our SBOMs with our approved dependencies. And, we have an approval process to allow things into the environment that, goes through scanning. So the SBOM is just a single tool in the arsenal. You have to, you get the artifact, but then you actually have to look at it, you have to act on it, and then we have other automation that works within all of that. Having it within the CI/CD pipeline, though, means that with every single commit that our developers are making back to main, we are getting that analysis back of, does everything look good? Are anything coming up from the automated CD side? And then from our internal things, is this all approved? Did this go through the right channels?
Awesome.
Yeah, and that's a perfect, the software factory level, absolutely. And one thing that the DoD has definitely embraced the concept and the purpose of the SBOM. There's official policies that publicly available. Of course, just there are many resources that you can read to understand the DoD perspective, but understand the original process that was used, for risk management framework and for compliance was just generating a hardware software list, just trying to understand what the different software components in an infrastructure are. As we've evolved to the need for the SBOM, based on dependencies and more of a software engineering perspective rather than just pure coding, we're in this place now where honestly the DoD had to evolve, and so that's the real beauty of why the SBOM has been so rapidly adopted and integrated into DoD policies, because we had to have another way to separate the infrastructure, hardware, software components from the different pieces that make up software development. And so SBOM, Sadia nailed it. SBOM is critically important, but it still has to be used. So now we're in a place where we can't identify those different layers in the software, but we're also having to evolve how we assess them and analyze the risk of them.
Mm-hmm. And I like that you brought up the software development aspect of it, because the title of this is Go Fast and Be Secure, because I was inspired by Janet, actually your colleague Janet's recent blog post about going ludicrous speed or something like that to be secure. It's you actually, I know some like those two things seem antithetical to each other, but we believe that they are actually related, right? That if you are secure, you can go faster, and you can go if you go faster, you could be more secure. So, but I know I could get down to the SBOM rabbit hole for a long time, but we should move on to the next slide.
Well, and I think you segued really well, because speed of app development is one of the things that's really driving application security. ultimately, from a development standpoint, developers are incented to get product to market. They want to get product in customers' hands. So as security people, our job isn't to put blockers in front of them. Our job is to enable them to do that securely and still be able to meet their requirements. And for the most part, it's not the development teams don't want security. They want to be secure. They just want to also make sure that they are getting product out for the business. But I think there's a really important element of this. A lot of us, I think everyone on this call to some extent, has kind of grown up in security. And, we've lived and breathed it for so long, and it's easy to forget that, coming up in school, in college, there wasn't necessarily that same level of security training and security awareness. And for computer science in particular, developers aren't taught security in college for the most part. A couple of years ago, we looked at the top 50 computer science programs in the US. None of them had a required secure development class. Only 2 of them had mention of secure development in one of their classes, like in the agenda, in the syllabus. And I think 9 had some elective class that mentioned or focused on secure development. So, our development teams aren't coming out of school with this wealth of security knowledge. They're focused on other things. I know when I took computer science classes, I learned about logic. There were operating systems classes. I think I did a class in assembly. I did basic programming. Security wasn't necessarily a huge focus. There was one actually TA'd a class on cryptography, but it wasn't about how to develop secure code. It's not something that everyone comes up learning. So it's really important to make sure that we are embedding security into the development experience in a useful way. And that kind of brings me into the next element in terms of forces on AppSec. We talk about Gen AI coding assistants, which are definitely taking off. There's a lot of value to them. But keep in mind, they're only as good as the code that they're trained on. And, not unlike open source software, which we were talking about a little bit before, they're not magic. And, you've got to make sure that you're doing that same level of verification and validation on that generated code. Now, the good news, as we just heard, governments are prioritizing this. So you've got incentive to do it. And that speaks to the fact that there's this awareness. Yes, there are all of these challenges to it, but we know we want good practice. We've already talked plenty about software supply chain, so I will not dive any deeper into that one, though, Rita.
Great. Yes, I know. And to a point to the government thing, I mean, there was an executive order a couple of years ago about improving cybersecurity and trust among citizens, I think is the whole title. And that really spoke to me. It's how do we have to improve service. First of all, there was one about improving service, digital service, and security. So to regain trust and engage with the citizens, make them feel better. So I don't know, Chris, Sadia, you're right in that. And some of that stuff, if you want to add to that.
Had a great conversation about this earlier also, and one of the things to remember about how the public sector and DoD look at security is based on risk. Step 1 of the process we use is classification of the data. And I don't even mean, a lot of people think classified in movies, secret or top secret. And in this case, what we're actually saying is more risk. For anyone on the show that's familiar or listening in, there's a CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And that is the fundamental what makes up cybersecurity risk and processes. And so from a government perspective, they're simply looking at, is their PII, right, or their social security number? Is somebody's name and address even, or national security, something related to cryptographics. See, there's tons of examples. And in fact, the total volume for data analysis is over 500 pages in 2 different volumes. So understand, it's a huge part of how we assess risk in DoD. So we start with that. We look at that data type, and then as we're talking about the different layers of containers, right? Or as we get into more modern systems, orchestration, right? Kubernetes and different parts of the application, it's not as simple as just saying application security. It's much more complex. And then based on the data types that I'm talking about, that changes what scope and what granularity you get into on some of those controls. So it's the same thing as we're talking about the modernization and looking at the total supply chain as part of assessing risk. At any moment, that's what is being done is a daily, to hourly, whatever scope you want to get into, but every aspect of the infrastructure and the application is being assessed from the perspective of risk.
I have a interesting perspective on this one because, Sandy, you mentioned growing up in security. I did not actually grow up in security. I would say my tech career group is a platform engineer. So a lot of like Kubernetes, a lot of container stuff, a lot of deployment of things. And like, there's inherently a security aspect to that because you need to be thinking about that as you're deploying, but it's not specific. And so what's interesting to me is a lot of my security expertise came from working within government spaces. So you have to have certain security requirements to be platform administrators within government spaces. So that's the reason I got a Security Plus certification when I first started learning about, more specific security aspects. Then when I was a platform engineer, a new platform engineer who, hadn't been trained in these things, going through those control documents, sometimes it can feel very arduous. But for a 101 developer, that I'm new to this, these were great baseline guidelines for me to follow. And then as you become more involved with owning your security and owning your controls, you start to learn, hey, the controls, there's an intent behind each one of these. So if you are doing more modern systems and you're seeing a control that maybe is referring to a system that is maybe a more, maybe there's a legacy requirement, or maybe it's written in a way that is referencing an older system, you learn how to make the justifications within your own environment. And so like as a platform engineer, a lot of these government, controls, a lot of the government guidelines really helped grow me in my security learning and knowledge.
I love that you brought up platform engineering because we have done a lot of writing and talking and espousing of platform engineering as a discipline at Tanzu, because ultimately that's a core audience for us. And one of the things that we say is you have to work with security folks really closely and understand their requirements, right? And I do believe platform engineers and platform engineering discipline can help kind of turn security and compliance into a superpower, right? So because your combination of your understanding, combination of making it so that developers can focus on what they need to focus on and not worry, right? As we said, we started the conversation, right? It's about, so we can even take a look at this, right? Letting developers, like reducing the toil for them in that. And so this is one of my favorite new slides. One of my colleagues created this, one of our colleagues. And it just is so simple for me to get it. So this is, to me, is why you would consider using a platform, right, or a platform as a service type of utility in your systems. We look here, right, and Chris and Sadia can explain this a little more. Now, these are based on the NIST 853. That's the one, the mother of all of all controls. My understanding is multiple other controls are derived from that one. So security geeks here probably already know about it, but there's more than 400. This is just one example, right? So all at the application layer without a platform, right? So I don't know, Sadia, Chris, talk a little bit more about that, and then we can show how we might mitigate some of this toil with a platform.
So I'm just going to very quickly, before I pass it over to Chris, one of the things as a platform engineer that is so important to understand is these are your controls. This is your platform. It is your responsibility. This is your product that you're providing to your users. So you want to be secure. And so those controls at that, networking, storage, server, and virtualization layer, that is really like, that's yours to own. And that's what you're giving to your application teams who are going to be riding on top of your platform.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I appreciated what Sadia shared a few minutes ago too about her journey. For awareness, we've actually worked together for several years now, and a large part of that has been, like 99% of it has been on the software factory. So we've had some wonderful conversations talking about this understanding of responsibility and security. And one of the things that we've kind of, I don't want to, compliance geeked out, I don't know what to call it, but just had a lot of fun kind of collaborating on is how do we help teams understand that compliance is not a paper drill, but rather it's security should already be done. Because a lot of times we'll throw the phrase industry best practices around, right? Those came from somewhere, and many times I think sometimes there's a danger in separating compliance from doing actual good security practices. And they're not separate. They actually work together, but we try to approach it as compliance should be the byproduct of good security. If you're doing good security in your organization, you shouldn't have to worry about compliance. Yes, you obviously have to do the paperwork. There's some work that has to be done, but from an actual, going back to risk, from a risk perspective, good security should enable that outcome of compliance. And so diving into these controls that are being shared here and this idea, what if it's not as simple? Let me say it differently. When we say application security, what if there's actually many different layers of responsibility to that? It's not as simple as telling an application developer, you're responsible for 400 things, but rather how do we actually understand each person's role in this set? Because the developer, maybe the source code in some inheritance models, the application developer isn't even going to worry about the database that is provided by a platform, but their only responsibility should be making sure that their application, that their user experience is good, right? That their application responsibility is there, but other layers of the infrastructure can provide these other portions, the data, runtime, middleware, and so on and so forth. And so if we're doing our job from a compliance and security engineer perspective, it's helping those teams understand the security concepts, not the spreadsheet, right? Not diving in and treating everything as just compliance speak, but rather what are those security concepts that they're responsible for? And that empowers them, by the way. One of the things I love sharing is that I have yet to run into an application developer in my DoD organizations that did not want to do security. Once they understood that this was a good thing, that this was about empowering them and enabling them to secure their code, I've never once had them say something like, "Oh, that's just compliance." Not a single time, because ultimately people do want to be secure. They know that the things they're doing are worth protecting, but it's just a matter of teaching and enabling it in a way that makes sense.
Yep. And so what we are proposing is if you can take say 300 of those controls and add them at the platform layer, the platform engineers can then, to me, this is so obvious because you can be more scalable that way. You can be more consistent that way. And it takes away toil from the app level. And there's, what I've learned since I first saw this is that our Spring governance tool, right, which Spring Framework for Java developers actually can further reduce these controls. So that's another webinar. Actually, I think I have a link to it at the end of this. So really, this is our case for platform. But of course, Chris and Sadia can attest to the power of culture here, right? Security is a team sport. Everybody is responsible for it. But how do you make everybody responsible for it without adding too much toil to them? And that's where I think a platform could come in. So I'm a big believer in platforms can actually change behaviors, and behavior is what changes culture. So I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything here. This is based on some work we actually did. If Chris or Sadia want to talk a little bit about that before we move on.
So yeah, I think, I hadn't actually seen these two slides before. And I was thinking the first one, I was like, and then this one, I'm like, this looks more like what our model is like, because, our application teams don't have to worry about as many things within the platform. That lets them really focus on delivering features to their users. That lets them focus on the pieces that are more under their control. They're able to iterate much, much faster because they're not wondering about, they don't have to worry about the database portions of it. They're not worrying about their containers or their operating system. And I'm going to give a quick metric of an analysis we did recently, which is we ran some scanners against an operating system and then looked at what that number of CVEs within that operating system. And there were something like 43 CVEs within that operating system. If you were to, if all of the individual app teams were having to do that themselves, we'd be looking at hundreds, of organizational hours spent addressing hundreds of CVEs. The platform team, though, can address those CVEs quickly and then spread that out to the whole application team. So, in this particular scenario, the estimate for how long this would take for the whole every single application team needs to go address these CVEs was going to be something like, weeks in order to get that all done, because and it would cut into their ability to deliver features to their users. For the platform team, they were able to do this in, a couple of days because that's a piece of the system that they know very well. They're able to update that, and then they can push out those, that updated base image to the entire organization, and just really go from having, potentially thousands of CVEs across the organization. I've got a small team addressing 50 instead and pushing out fixes all over.
Yep. So I have a question to Sandy. I don't know if we can have her on screen here. And it's that I know you're covering app security.
Yeah.
How do you see the platform engineering role and discipline helping with that, or the relationship between the dev teams and the platform teams?
I really liked what Sadia just said about, being able to extend responsibility to the appropriate people so that you're not repeating work. There's a lot to be said for having the right level of the team responsible for the guardrails. And a couple of years ago, I did some research on low-code security, and that's sort of a similar issue where you have these platforms and you can potentially develop really quickly. You can develop really interesting applications. Citizen developers can do that, but they're not trained in application security. They're not trained in secure development. We've already talked about the fact that a lot of that training isn't happening. But if the guardrails are there, then they don't have to know those things. They don't, they don't have to be responsible for all the controls because they have the guardrails and the limitations, and they can still create productive code. So I compare that to, what we were just talking about with respect to platform engineering, and I see a lot of parallels. Putting in place the right controls, the right guardrails at the right level so that each stakeholder at their stage of ownership, of development, of operations can be responsible for their piece and not worry about the other pieces. I do think that's an important part of all of this, being able to help people focus. The last thing you want to do is give someone like 1,000 CVEs and 950 of them are things that they don't touch. That's not useful.
And I love the visual. I know we've used it. Maybe it's overused in security and app dev or app security, but the whole racetrack analogy, right? There's banks, and if it's a road race, you want one with guardrails, literal guardrails, so you can go fast. You just feel more comfortable going faster that way.
And that's a lot of it. I mean, and even with compliance, as we were talking about earlier, if we want people to deliver product quickly, let's put in the relevant security guardrails so that they can actually do that.
Yep. And you do that by, as a platform engineer, I would imagine, really collaborating with security and compliance teams and the app dev teams, right? It needs to be all coming together. So.
Yeah, one of the things I use sometimes when teaching about application security. For those not familiar, there's a DISA-produced guide called the STIG, which is Security Technical Implementation Guide, and it's a long another type of checklist that helps you determine the security posture of an individual component of the infrastructure. And so one of those is called the Application Security and Development STIG. Acronym soup, but or the ASD STIG. It's 286 questions. What's interesting is if you dig into those 286 questions from an application security standpoint, you find that I think 171 of them are tied directly to the OWASP top 10. There's known security risk baked into this process, but go a little bit deeper and you'll find that at least 70% of those questions can be tied back to the platform layer. So this is why one of the things that we focus on so much and so granularly is inheritance among these layers, because again, if you can trace all of your risk in the application to both the OWASP top 10, you can identify those attack vectors, but then also you can identify platform responsibility, and that's a huge step in actually reducing that application toil, because application teams do not need to be handed a list of 286 questions. What they need to understand is what's already being provided by the infrastructure through that inheritance. And then again, they can focus on that small subset that they are actually responsible for.
Awesome.
I would even go so far as to say if you handed an application development team a list of 286 questions, that's a great way to make them hate security and compliance.
Yes.
Exactly.
I've been
How
there
do I?
also.
Because yeah, they're gonna be like, how do I avoid this? Right? How do I go around this? They're
Right.
gonna do that. There's problem solvers by nature.
Right. Our goal is to build security into the process, so they want to work with us.
Yeah. Exactly.
I,
We talk a
I
lot
have been called a problem before, so if there are problems,
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So where are we? Oh yes. Yeah, I think Sandy, some more talk about how to handle application risk.
Yeah, these are some of the things that we're seeing really need to take hold for there to be effective AppSec programs for security teams to really support the development organization, support the platform organization, support DevOps more effectively. And there is that element of tackling security debt. There's always a fine line, right? But if you let things fester for too long, you slow down, you slow the team down, you slow down development. You know, there's only so long you can wait to address things. So being able to build in those solutions, have the guardrails in place that you can address issues quickly becomes really important.
Yeah.
We've already talked. Yeah, go ahead.
I was asking about that. So is this where you would consider something like continuous upgrade thinking? Because that's something we talk about as well. You know, a lot of folks, for example, in the Java world, right, are pretty far behind. So we're trying to get them to move to use a more recent version of Java, for example. But understandably, they're scared and they're worried. You know, what's it going to break? You know, I mean, but that is something we're trying to say is like you have to staying by keeping up with the upgrades of the software that you're running. You can, as you put it here, tackle some of that security debt. Because there's probably old CVEs in there that you, or even things that are just slowing you down.
Right. Upgrading to the
Maybe
latest
just
version, to your
flaws.
point of OSS libraries, absolutely is going to help you keep up with and address security debt in a much more organic way than having this initiative to let's go back and fix all the things. If we're doing it on a continuous basis, that's obviously a heck of a lot better.
Exactly. Okay. Sorry, I wanted to interject there, but okay.
No, I think it's tied into the next one on securing the software supply chain. One of the things that makes it easier is staying up to date, because if you're up to date with, you know, latest version of your API specifications, latest versions of the external resources that you're calling, latest version of both commercial and open source software, by the way, all of those things. But, you know, taking a look and understanding what are your software supply chain dependencies, both your internal ones as well as third party partners, all of that, and paying attention and asking those questions. You know, to Sadia's point, SBOMs get you part of the way there, and that's one element of it. It's not going to solve the problem, but including all of the tools that you have at your disposal to secure the software supply chain, absolutely, you know, a critical part of this. I think adopting DevSecOps, you know, Rita, back to that continuous security discussion. You know, if you're really going to enable, you know, quick releases, if you're going to enable us to stay up to date, having the automation, having the tooling, having the collaboration, breaking us all out of our silos, it is an essential part of that.
Right.
And then threat modeling, I actually want to go back to something, Chris, you were saying about compliance, because one of the best use cases I heard for threat modeling when I was doing some research on this was someone at a government agency who commented, and I should say, you know, sometimes threat modeling has this reputation of, oh, this is just a compliance checkbox and we do the threat model and then we put it away. No. What this guy did that I thought was terrific was he actually used the threat model and he presented that to the audit team as a way of demonstrating, yes, we are aware of this issue. We have documented it. We have discussed it. Here is our proposed solution, our mitigation, our controls that are dealing with it. That's why threat modeling has value, because you can actually use it to prioritize and document and decide how you're going to address different threats. It's not there just to go do a paper exercise. There is real value to it. And it's one of my favorite topics to talk about these days. Ooh, Sadia, you've got an example on this. I want to hear about it.
Yeah, so we have a security operations team at the Army Software Factory, and one of the things that was really fun for us was going through threat modeling exercises. And from a product perspective, so as a product manager, it's really thinking of like bringing product thinking to how we're approaching security. What we found was that threat modeling exercise actually just built out our backlog. So we did the threat model exercise, and I'm done as a product manager. I'm done. I've got my prioritized backlog ready to go. We've been working off of that backlog, and it's so fantastic because we're already starting to see really rapid returns on, by using that threat modeling exercise to determine our order of work. We're already starting to see results from, the types of things we're monitoring, the checks that we've put into place where we're doing our audits. Really, really great to use that for the product perspective.
Okay, now I want to interview
Awesome.
you for my next threat modeling research.
Awesome. So cool. But I did notice that both Chris and Satya lit up when you said threat modeling. I mean, the other thing I think about too is constantly testing your DevSecOps working plan. I know there's a more formal way of the DoD uses for that, but that is something that I think is perhaps underappreciated, right? Test that you can respond quickly, right? And one thing that the CrowdStrike failure, it wasn't a breach, but it was a failure, really, the software failed, was that fixing that quickly is really important. And so, it seems to me that these things are really doing constantly testing of how test your systems and test your operating model for dealing with these things is really important.
Well, you raise a really interesting point in that, Rita. And I think you go back to the threat modeling exercise. To what extent, even when we do threat modeling, are we modeling failures in our tool chain, in our pipeline? That's an aspect of it. It's more than just the software, it's more than the product. It's the ecosystem, it's the environment, it's the surrounding infrastructure. We need to think about some of that too.
Absolutely. All right. Next slide. Might be towards the end there. Oh yeah. So we're talking about what does good look like? Good security, right? We talked about grounded in DevOps, and what does that mean? Again, team, feel free to go in here, but we talked about automation with guardrails, securing your software supply chains, SBOMs, and of course, platform engineering. All things that I think make up a good DevSecOps practice and strategy. Now, continuous compliance and security is one of my favorite topics to talk about because I'm a big proponent, and I think we might have even done something about along these lines, Sandy, maybe earlier this year, which is that you can't treat security as a one and done outcome. You can't be like, okay, I'm secure now. Okay, everything's in production, it's good. No, you have to be monitoring that when it's in prod, and how do you, again, make sure that it continues to be secure. You also coined the term shift security everywhere, right? Spawned from the whole concept of shifting security left, which I think also was misunderstood when it first came out, just like SBOMs, which is like, we're not saying make security a decision to be made by developers, right? It's a matter of, like, again, built in throughout the process, and it has to be invisible. And culture, super important. We talked about who is responsible for what aspects, right, of security, making sure the right people are responsible for that, and really understanding that you can go fast and be secure, and those things are actually interrelated. And of course, so one of the other things that I learned from the CrowdStrike failure is how quickly you recover is important, because they were the last. I think one of the airlines was one of the last to recover, and so the government was like, "What's up? How come all your peers were back up in a few days, and you're still trying to figure this out?" So, a focus on the mean time to recovery or mean time to change is becoming more important, I think. I don't know, Sandy, if you have any thoughts on that. If you hear anything about the mean time to recovery.
Oh, I have many thoughts on many of those things. I will share two of them. One, I'm glad you brought up shift everywhere. That's, as you said, that's a term we've been using quite a bit. And a lot of it comes down to the fact that I believe when we started talking about shift left, we missed an important word in it, which was shift left also, or shift left to. It was never meant to be instead. It was supposed to be in addition. It was supposed to be we're focusing too much on the right. We need to make sure we're focused on the left. It was never meant to be putting all of the responsibility in the hands of just the dev team. It was to build it all into the pipeline throughout the pipeline. And I think that's something that for a while may have gotten lost. And I think we're doing a little bit better now. But I do think that was an element. And then I'm really glad you brought up the resilience story as well, because I think it goes beyond application development. It goes beyond platform engineering. It hits a lot of different, elements in the organization beyond security even. But, some of my colleagues write about resilience and redundancy and some of those elements. And, when you think about some of these major incidents and events, what are the guardrails and what are the processes and controls you have in place for business resilience? It's not an area I write about as much, but it's definitely something that organizations need to pay attention to. And we have folks that have taken a good hard look at that.
Awesome.
One of the things I know you mentioned David Zinzian earlier, Rita, but one of the things we've talked about a lot is this is partially why a lot of the high-risk industries are shifting to a more NIST-based approach, because there are many compliance frameworks out there, but the NIST, based on risk management framework, based on RMF, really captures this idea of whole organization security.
Mhm.
There's, again, as much as I appreciate the evolution, and I love what you said, Sandy, too, about the fact that shifting left is meant to be inclusive. It's meant to be also shift left, because DoD is definitely recognizing this with a lot of the guidance on continuous authorization that has come out recently. There's an entire NIST 800-161 is now focused on supply chain security. It's like 320 something pages with hundreds of controls just focused on supply chain because of the infrastructure. Not the application development. It's focused on where's that application going to reside. Continuous monitoring is huge. RMF 2.0, the new process. So, yeah, absolutely love your focus on that. And so, going back to the David Zinzian topic, though, again, that we were talking about, just the idea that there has to be a level of granularity. We have to consider the full organization, not just focusing on certain areas.
Yep.
Yeah, on the shift everywhere perspective, I was actually having a conversation with somebody the other day about the different types of scans that we do during the whole life cycle. And the question was, why are we doing these runtime scans when we've scanned the container before it goes into the environment? Why do we need to also do the runtime scan? This feels expensive. We're paying for an extra tool. It's additional compute. Why? And so the analogy I use is, let's say you're running a club. And the rule to get in the club is you can't wear a red shirt. And I got a bouncer at the front door that's going to make sure you're not wearing a red shirt. We're not going to look inside the club. We don't have any monitoring in there. Are you willing to bet $1 million that nobody in that club is wearing a red shirt? No, nobody put the red shirt on underneath something and then went inside and took it off. Now they're wearing a red shirt. Nobody had a red shirt in their purse. You're not going to bet.
And what if the bouncer was colorblind? Just saying.
Yeah.
Also, the pen tester in me is figuring out all sorts of different ways to get into the club with the red shirt right now, Sadia.
What if I ordered some red wine and spilled it on my white shirt? Now I've got a red shirt, right? There's so many different ways to do this. So the question is, when you put it like that, it's very obvious. No, I don't just need it at the door. You need it throughout the whole system. And so, thinking about it like that, the shift everywhere makes a lot of sense.
Or what if an organization is doing container security but isn't willing to pay for the plugin to look at the container itself? So they're only looking at the area outside of the container.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh,
which I have seen happen.
Sandy looks triggered.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Absolutely. And with container security, you can look at the image, but if you're not looking at how this thing is running and making sure there haven't been privilege escalations, changes, good Lord.
Yeah. Mystery meat. Mystery meat. Awesome. I don't know if we have any questions from the audience, or if any folks here have questions for Sandy or want to go deeper on anything we discussed. We can do that. So it seems like we don't have any questions, which that's okay. But yeah, I would love to. Anybody have any final thoughts? And then we have some additional resources you can check out. But yeah. hopefully people here got some good takeaways that they can use as they're bolstering their security strategy, or even just maybe they're starting from scratch, or just would like to be more vocal and educated on this stuff. Please reach out to all of us. You can, again, there's more research here, as well as check out, Sandy has a blog. If you're not a Forrester client, if you are, check out her research. And I think that's it. So that's that. I don't know if anybody else wants final words. That's it. Awesome. No, thanks you, everybody. This was great.
Thank you. Thanks for
Really
having me.
enjoyed this conversation. Really enjoyed this. This is been one of my best webinars, I think. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. I do want to just do a special thank you to Rita, our host, moderator, today's presentation. Thank you to guest speaker, Stanley, for joining us today, for Chris and Sadia for being here, and most of all, thanks to all of you guys for joining. There were a lot of you guys here. I do see a lot of folks that are clicking these links that we provided. So like Rita had mentioned, if there is anything that we have, continue to share that out. And we'll do our best to answer your questions after this event. So thank you guys. This has been recorded. Will be available on demand. Once again, thanks to all of our amazing speakers here on screen, for everyone who's helped on the background, and for all of you guys for joining us. Hope to see you guys
Bye,
at our next event.
everyone.